Sir, I need you to step aside now. You don't match the profile of someone who belongs in this boarding area." The words hit like physical blows loud enough to cut through the ambient noise of Gate B-22 at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Officer Bradley Reynolds stood with his legs planted wide, one hand resting on his belt near his handcuffs, the other extended toward the well-dressed black man who had been about to scan his first-class boarding pass. The sudden silence that followed was deafening. Passengers in the crowded gate area froze conversations, halting mid-sentence. The gate agent's fingers hovered over her keyboard, her professional smile faltering. And the couple, the targets of this public challenge, stood perfectly still, their expressions shifting from relaxed anticipation to careful neutrality in the span of a heartbeat. What Officer Reynolds didn't know, what no one in that terminal could have guessed, was that in exactly 7 minutes everyone present would witness just how catastrophically he had misjudged the situation. In 7 minutes, the power dynamic in that gate would flip so dramatically that careers would end, lives would change, and a movement would begin, all because Bradley Reynolds had picked the wrong passengers to profile on a Tuesday morning in Atlanta. Dr. Elise Montgomery adjusted the strap of her designer handbag with steady hands that had just yesterday reconstructed the damaged aorta of a 52-year-old father of 3. At 34, she was the youngest cardiothoracic surgeon ever to lead the innovative valve replacement program at Atlanta Memorial Hospital. Her tailored navy pantsuit spoke of success without flash, her natural hair styled in a sleek professional updo. Only the slight tightening around her eyes betrayed any reaction to the officer's words. Beside her, James Montgomery stood a half-step forward, instinctively positioning himself between his wife and the officer. At 36, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who navigated high-level security clearances and classified information daily. His charcoal gray suit was impeccably tailored, his burgundy tie a perfect complement to the pocket square that matched his wife's blouse. A small detail they always coordinated when traveling together, one of their many private traditions. "Is there a problem?" Officer James asked, his deep voice, measured, controlled, giving away nothing of the calculations already running behind his eyes. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. They had met 12 years ago at Howard University, she in medical school, he completing his master's in cybersecurity. Their first date had been coffee that turned into dinner, that turned into a sunrise walk through the National Mall. They'd married 6 years ago in a ceremony that blended their family's traditions, his Southern Baptist roots, her Jamaican heritage. Their partnership was built on mutual ambition, shared values, and the unspoken understanding that came from similar childhoods where excellence wasn't just encouraged, but expected. James Elise murmured her voice just loud enough for her husband to hear. "It's fine. Let's just understand what the officer needs." James nodded almost imperceptibly. This wasn't their first encounter with unwarranted suspicion. They had a protocol for these moments developed over years of navigating spaces where their presence was questioned simply because of their skin color. Remain calm. Ask clarifying questions. Document everything. Preserve dignity above all. What made today different wasn't the situation, it was the stakes. Elise was due in Washington, D.C. in less than 6 hours to deliver the keynote address at the National Medical Association's annual gala. Her speech on innovative cardiac care in underserved communities represented the culmination of years of groundbreaking work. And James was carrying something in his laptop bag that couldn't be delayed, something only a handful of people in the country had clearance to transport. "I'll handle it," he whispered back, squeezing her hand once before turning his full attention to Officer Reynolds, whose impatience was growing visibly with each passing second. Neither of them showed fear. Neither of them showed anger. They'd learned long ago that in moments like these, emotions were luxuries they couldn't afford. Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport surged with humanity, a constantly shifting river of travelers flowing through its concourses. Announcements echoed overhead, competing with the hum of conversations in dozens of languages and the steady rhythm of rolling suitcases against tile floors. Gate B22 was one of many identical gates lining the concourse. The same blue chairs, the same digital displays, the same counters where gate agents processed a never-ending stream of boarding passes. The Montgomerys had navigated the morning's travel routine flawlessly until now. Their TSA pre-check status had moved them efficiently through the main security checkpoint. No bags flagged for additional screening, no random selection for the body scanner. They'd stopped for coffee at the upscale cafe near their gate, picked up the latest issues of the New England Journal of Medicine and Cybersecurity Quarterly, and arrived at Gate B22 precisely 45 minutes before their scheduled departure to Reagan National. Around them, the gate area hosted the usual diverse cross-section of travelers, a group of college students in matching university sweatshirts huddled over shared phones. A young mother tried to entertain restless twins while her partner arranged snacks for the flight. Several business travelers in various states of rumpled formality tapped away at laptops or scrolled through phones. An elderly couple shared a crossword puzzle, heads bent together in quiet collaboration. The digital display above the counter showed Delta Flight 1372 to DCA on time, first class now boarding. The gate agent, whose name tag read Carol, had just announced boarding for first class and Diamond Medallion members when Officer Reynolds had appeared seemingly from nowhere. Gate B22 was a fishbowl glass walls on 3 sides, the fourth opening to the busy concourse. There was no privacy here, no shelter from public scrutiny. Every word spoken above normal conversation volume carried to dozens of ears. Every gesture played out against the backdrop of bright fluorescent lighting and gleaming white floors. It was a stage set for public performance, and Officer Reynolds had just cast the Montgomerys in roles they never auditioned for. A small girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, watched wide-eyed from her seat near the window, her coloring book forgotten in her lap. Her mother, noticing her daughter's attention shift, followed her gaze to the unfolding scene and drew her child closer, whispering something in her ear. The girl's eyes remained fixed on Elise. The space between the Montgomerys and Officer Reynolds had become a vacuum, drawing the attention of everyone within sight. And in an airport, there was always someone watching. Officer Bradley Reynolds had joined airport security 22 years ago, back when the job still carried the promise of purpose after 9/11. Now, at 52, the purpose had calcified into routine, and the routine had hardened into resentment. His uniform, pressed to military precision, remained the one aspect of his life he could control completely. This morning had begun badly, and deteriorated from there. His ex-wife had called at 5 a.m. demanding the alimony payment that he was already 2 weeks late on. His supervisor, Captain Andrea Wilson, had pulled him aside to discuss community engagement metrics and passenger complaint patterns that she claimed showed concerning trends in his interaction style. His coffee had spilled in his car, leaving a stain on his uniform pants that he'd tried to wash out in the men's room sink, resulting in an even more noticeable wet patch. By the time he reached his post at Concourse B, Reynolds was a pressure cooker of frustration looking for a release valve. He scanned the crowds with eyes trained by years of experience, but also clouded by biases he'd never acknowledged even to himself. "You look like you're hunting for something specific today," remarked Officer Sofia Ramirez, 27, as she joined him for their shared patrol. The younger officer had been assigned to work with Reynolds for training, though she'd quickly realized she was learning more about what not to do than following his example. "Always am," Reynolds replied, not taking his eyes off the flow of travelers. "This job isn't about processing bodies through scanners. It's about instinct, patterns, anomalies." He tapped his temple. 20 years teaches you things no computer can flag." Ramirez nodded noncommittally. In her 6 months working with Reynolds, she'd noticed those instincts seemed remarkably consistent in who they targeted. She'd raised concerns once to Captain Wilson and had been assured the situation was under review. That had been 3 months ago. As they passed Gate B22, Reynolds slowed. His attention had locked onto the Montgomerys standing in line for first-class boarding. He observed them for several moments, his eyes narrowing. "Those two," he muttered. "Something's off." Ramirez followed his gaze. "The couple in the navy and gray? They look fine to me, already cleared security." Reynolds snorted. "That's the problem with your generation. You see a nice suit and fancy shoes and think everything's fine." He squared his shoulders. "Watch and learn. Security doesn't end at the checkpoint." "What exactly are you seeing that concerns you?" Ramirez pressed, uncomfortable with what appeared to be another baseless stop. "Look at them," Reynolds said, as if the evidence was obvious. "First-class designer luggage way they carry themselves like they own the place." His jaw tightened. "And they're tense. Watch his eyes scanning everything. Watch how he keeps touching that laptop bag. Classic signs of nervousness." What Reynolds didn't say, what he perhaps didn't even consciously acknowledge to himself, was how much the couple's evident success rankled him. Their easy confidence, their matched outfits, their obvious wealth and status, all of it a stark contrast to his own diminished circumstances. The mortgage on his suburban ranch house was underwater. His credit cards were maxed out. His son hadn't spoken to him in 3 years. "I'm going to do a spot check," Reynolds decided, already moving toward the gate. "Brad, wait." Ramirez started, but he was already gone, propelled by 22 years of accumulated frustrations and a badge that gave them teeth. "Sir, I need you to step aside now. You don't match the profile of someone who belongs in this boarding area." Officer Reynolds planted himself directly in the Montgomerys' path, his voice carrying clearly across the gate area. The line behind them came to an abrupt halt. Carol, the gate agent, froze with her hand extended for their boarding passes, confusion evident on her face. "Excuse me." James Montgomery kept his tone neutral, though his posture straightened almost imperceptibly. "You heard me?" Reynolds gestured to the side away from the boarding lane. "Both of you step over here for additional screening." "We've already completed security screening," Officer Elise said calmly. "We're just boarding our flight. Security is ongoing throughout the airport, ma'am. It doesn't end at the checkpoint." Reynolds' eyes never left James. "Now, are you going to comply, or do we need to escalate this situation?" James maintained eye contact with Reynolds, his expression composed. "Of course we'll comply, officer. We just want to understand what prompted this additional screening so we can address any concerns." Reynolds' mouth tightened at the measured response, not the defensive reaction he'd anticipated. "Move to the wall now. Both of you." Officer Ramirez had reached the gate and stood slightly behind Reynolds, her discomfort evident in her posture. She attempted to moderate the situation. "Perhaps we could do this more discreetly, Officer Reynolds." "This is standard procedure," Reynolds replied loud enough for everyone to hear, effectively shutting down her suggestion. Carol, recovering her professional composure, addressed the situation. "Officer, these passengers have valid first-class tickets. Their boarding was announced. Is there something I can help clarify?" Reynolds dismissed her with a wave. "Airline matters are your concern. Security is mine." By now, the entire gate area had gone quiet. The college students had stopped their conversations. The business travelers had looked up from their devices. Even the restless twins had fallen silent, sensing the tension in the air. James placed a gentle hand on Elise's back and guided her toward the wall as instructed. They moved with dignity, neither rushing nor resisting. As they reached the wall, James turned to face Reynolds. "We're cooperating fully, officer. How can we help resolve whatever concern you have?" The reasonable tone seemed to irritate Reynolds further. He stepped closer, invading James's personal space. "I'll ask the questions. You'll provide answers. That's how this works." From the crowd, a middle-aged woman in a business suit caught Elise's eye and mouthed, "I'm recording." Elise gave the slightest nod of acknowledgement. "First, I need to see boarding passes and ID. Now!" Reynolds held out his hand expectantly. James reached slowly into his jacket pocket and produced 2 boarding passes and their driver's licenses, handling them to Reynolds with steady hands. Reynolds examined the documents with exaggerated scrutiny, holding them up to the light as if checking for forgeries. First class to D.C., he read aloud, his tone suggesting inherent suspicion. "Quite expensive tickets." "Yes, they are," James replied simply. "And what business do you have in Washington?" Reynolds demanded. "I'm delivering a keynote address at a medical conference," Elise answered professionally. "My husband is accompanying me." Reynolds looked at her for the first time, his gaze assessing and dismissive. "Medical conference. And what would your role be at something like that?" The implication was clear, and the audience at the gate collectively tensed. Elise's expression remained unchanged. "I'm the keynote speaker. I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon at Atlanta Memorial." Reynolds raised his eyebrows, making his disbelief obvious. "Right. And you?" He turned back to James. "What do you do that lets you afford first-class tickets?" "I work in cybersecurity," James answered, providing no additional details. The vagueness clearly frustrated Reynolds. "That's not an answer. What company? What position?" James maintained his composure. "I'm a senior security consultant with government contracts. Some details of my work are classified." Reynolds snorted. "Classified, of course." He handed the IDs back roughly. "Well, Dr. Montgomery and Mr. Classified, you've been selected for additional screening. This won't take long if you cooperate fully." The humiliation was deliberate, the skepticism in his voice unmistakable. Yet neither James nor Elise reacted to the provocation. They stood side by side, facing Reynolds with the same composed dignity they'd maintained from the start. The confrontation had now attracted attention beyond the gate area. Travelers passing by slowed to watch. Airport staff exchanged concerned glances, and Officer Ramirez, standing behind her partner, looked increasingly troubled by what was unfolding. Against the wall, hands visible, Reynolds ordered, gesturing to the bare stretch of wall beside the gate counter. The command, delivered in the same tone one might use for criminal suspects, drew audible murmurs from the crowd. James and Elise complied, moving to the indicated spot with deliberate calm. The position placed them in full view of everyone at Gate B-22, exposed on display, their private business transformed into public spectacle. Officer James began, his voice still measured. "Perhaps you could tell us what specifically prompted this additional screening. We have a flight to catch, and my wife has professional obligations in D.C. "You don't set the timeline here," Reynolds snapped. "And if you're innocent, you have nothing to worry about, right?" He turned to Ramirez. "Watch them while I run these IDs." Ramirez stepped forward, her discomfort evident, but her professionalism intact. "Sir, ma'am, this shouldn't take long," she said quietly, a subtle apology in her tone. Reynolds moved a few feet away, speaking into his radio. The Montgomerys could hear fragments running verification. "First class. Something doesn't add up." Elise leaned slightly toward James. "Our flight," she whispered, glancing at her watch. "I know," he murmured back. "Just follow the protocol. We'll make it work." Reynolds returned a new edge of satisfaction in his expression. "So, Dr. Montgomery, according to our database, there's no physician registered with your name at Atlanta Memorial." Elise's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's incorrect. I've been there for 6 years. I'm the head of cardiac valve surgery." "That's not what our system shows," Reynolds countered. "Care to explain the discrepancy?" "There is no discrepancy, Officer Reynolds," Elise replied, her voice firm but calm. "Your information is simply outdated or incorrect. You're welcome to call the hospital and verify my position." Reynolds ignored the suggestion. "And Mr. Montgomery, you claim to have government contracts. With which agencies exactly?" "As I mentioned, much of my work is classified." "I'm not at liberty to discuss details in a public setting," James responded. "Convenient?" Reynolds scoffed. "First-class tickets, vague government work, medical credentials that don't check out. You understand why this raises flags?" By now the scheduled boarding time for first class had come and gone. Passengers due to board next were gathering, watching the scene unfold with a mix of curiosity, discomfort, and from some growing indignation. An older white woman in the seating area stood up, her voice carrying clearly. "Excuse me, officer, I couldn't help overhearing. I'm Sarah Goldberg. I'm a patient of Dr. Montgomery's. She performed my valve replacement last year." "She's exactly who she says she is." Reynolds turned sharply. "Ma'am, please stay out of official security business. It's hardly official if you're working with incorrect information," Sarah persisted. "This is harassment, plain and simple. Ma'am, one more word and you'll be subject to screening as well," Reynolds threatened. James intervened smoothly. "Thank you, but it's all right. We'll sort this out." His eyes met Sarah's with quiet gratitude before returning to Reynolds. "Officer, I understand you're doing your job, but there seems to be a misunderstanding. Perhaps, if you told us exactly what you're looking for, we could address your concerns more directly." Reynolds stepped closer, lowering his voice, but not enough to prevent nearby passengers from hearing. "What I'm looking for is people who don't belong. People who raise red flags. People who can't give straight answers about who they are and what they're doing." The implication hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. Elise met his gaze directly. "Officer Reynolds, are there other passengers receiving this level of scrutiny today, or is it just us?" The question was pointed but delivered without heat, a professional asking for data, not an accused demanding justification. Reynolds' jaw tightened. "That's not your concern. It is if we're being profiled," James said quietly. "No one said anything about profiling." Reynolds snapped, his voice rising. "This is standard security protocol." "Then you wouldn't mind if I take notes about this standard protocol?" James reached slowly toward his pocket. "Hands where I can see them," Reynolds barked, his hand moving to his belt. The sudden escalation sent a ripple of alarm through the watching crowd. Several more phones rose, recording now. "I was just reaching for my phone to document this interaction," James explained calmly, hands remaining visible. "As is my right. Your rights at an airport security checkpoint are limited, sir," Reynolds countered. "And right now I need to check your bags for security concerns." Elise glanced at the departure board. Their flight was now showing boarding status. "Officer, our flight is currently boarding. Is there any way to expedite this process?" "You'll board when I'm satisfied you're not a security risk," Reynolds replied. "Now place your bags on the floor in front of you. Slowly." The Montgomerys exchanged a brief glance, a private communication honed through years together, before carefully placing their carry-on items on the floor, Elise's designer handbag and small rolling suitcase, James's laptop bag and briefcase. "Step back," Reynolds ordered. As they complied, the confrontation had transformed the gate area into an impromptu courtroom with Reynolds as prosecutor, the Montgomerys as defendants, and every passenger a juror watching the proceedings unfold. The verdict, however, was far from certain. "I'll start with this one," Reynolds announced, picking up Elise's handbag. Without asking permission, he unzipped it and turned it upside down, dumping the contents into a nearby plastic bin that Officer Ramirez had hurriedly provided. The items clattered into the bin: a wallet, keys, phone, small makeup bag, prescription pad, stethoscope, and a stack of index cards held together with a binder clip. The cards scattered as they hit the bin, some sliding over the edge onto the floor. "Those are my speech notes," Elise exclaimed, instinctively moving to retrieve them. "Stay back," Reynolds ordered sharply. "Don't touch anything until I've cleared it." The index cards lay strewn across the floor, the careful organization now in chaos. Handwritten notes on cardiac innovation statistics, on healthcare disparities. Personal anecdotes about patients whose lives had been transformed, all now scattered at the feet of strangers. James placed a gentle hand on Elise's arm. "Let him finish," he murmured, though the tension in his jaw betrayed his own feelings about the situation. Reynolds picked through the items in the bin with deliberate slowness, examining her wallet, opening her makeup bag and inspecting each item, scrutinizing her prescription pad. "Convenient to have your own prescription pad," he commented. "Could write yourself anything you wanted." "That would be highly illegal and unethical," Elise responded evenly, "and easy to trace." Reynolds ignored her and turned to James's laptop bag, reaching for the zipper. "Officer James," said his voice taking on a new edge of authority, "that bag contains sensitive materials. I need to inform you that save it." Reynolds cut him off. Everyone's laptop is sensitive these days. He unzipped the bag and began removing items: a laptop in a security sleeve, several encrypted external drives in protective cases, a folder with government seals, and a slim metal case with a digital lock. Reynolds held up the metal case. "And what's this supposed to be?" "That contains classified materials related to my work," James explained calmly. "It's a secure transport case with government encryption. I'm not authorized to open it in public or unsecured spaces." Reynolds turned the case over in his hands. "Looks like a fancy box to me." "What's really inside?" "Open it." "I cannot do that, officer. It would violate federal security protocols," James stated firmly. Reynolds' expression hardened. "So you refuse a direct security request?" "I'm explaining that I'm legally prohibited from opening that case outside of a secured facility," James clarified. "The materials inside are protected under national security statutes." By now, a small crowd had formed a semicircle around them. Among them, a young white man in his 20s. Tyler Andrews, according to the university logo on his sweatshirt, was openly filming with his phone. Beside him, a Hispanic flight attendant, not assigned to their gate, watched with growing concern. Officer, the flight attendant, whose name tag read Mia Gonzalez, stepped forward. "These passengers have valid tickets for a flight that's boarding now. Is there something specific you're looking for that I might help clarify from the airline side?" Reynolds barely glanced at her. "This is a security matter, not an airline matter. Please step back." Mia stood her ground. "With respect, sir, delaying passengers without clear cause does become an airline matter when it affects our schedule." Reynolds finally turned to her, his expression darkening. "Are you interfering with a security screening?" "Not at all," she replied professionally. "I'm offering assistance to resolve whatever concerns you have so these passengers can make their flight." Reynolds dismissed her with a wave and turned back to the Montgomerys. "I need to see what's in this case. Either open it or I'll consider it suspicious cargo and act accordingly." The threat hung in the air. James remained composed but unyielding. "Officer Reynolds, that case contains materials classified at levels that require specific security clearance to access. Opening it here would constitute a federal offense." "Convenient excuse," Reynolds scoffed. He set the case down roughly and continued rummaging through the laptop bag. "And what about this?" He held up the folder with government seals. "More classified materials." "Yes," James confirmed. "Those documents relate to the Treasury Department's financial security infrastructure. Again, not for public viewing." Reynolds flipped the folder over in his hands, clearly tempted to open it despite the warnings. The crowd held its collective breath. Tyler Andrews, still filming, spoke up. "Just so you know, officer, this video has over 200 viewers right now on my live stream. People are asking why these passengers are being singled out when everyone else is boarding normally." Reynolds' head snapped toward him. "Put that phone away. Recording security procedures is prohibited." "Actually," Tyler countered, "TSA's own website states that filming is allowed as long as it doesn't interfere with screening procedures or capture monitor screens. I'm well within my rights." Reynolds' face flushed with anger. The situation was slipping from his control, and he knew it. He turned back to the Montgomerys, his decision made. "Mr. Montgomery, based on your refusal to comply with security directives and the suspicious nature of your belongings, I'm going to need to detain you for further questioning." He reached for his handcuffs. "Put your hands behind your back." The moment had arrived, the line crossed from questioning to detention. And still, James Montgomery maintained his composure, though his eyes now held a different quality, not fear but a kind of certainty, as if a prediction had been confirmed. Officer Reynolds James said, his voice clear and steady. "Before you proceed, I want to state for the record and for all these witnesses that you are making a serious error in judgment that will have significant consequences." Reynolds smiled thinly. "Is that a threat, sir?" "No," James replied calmly. "It's simply a statement of fact." As Reynolds reached for his handcuffs, the gate area erupted in a wave of reactions. The artificial politeness that had kept most passengers silent cracked under the weight of what they were witnessing. Sarah Goldberg, the older woman who had identified herself as Elise's patient, rose to her feet again. "This is absolutely outrageous. They've done nothing wrong, ma'am. Step back or you'll be next." Reynolds threatened without looking at her. "Go ahead," Sarah challenged, her voice shaking but determined. "I'm 62 years old. I survived open-heart surgery, and I'm not afraid of a bully with a badge. Arrest me too. Let's see how that plays on the news tonight." Tyler Andrews had positioned himself for a better angle with his phone. "We're at 500 viewers now," he announced, "and people are tagging the airport and TSA in the comments." Nearby, Richard Palmer, a 45-year-old white businessman in a rumpled suit, had been watching uncomfortably from behind his laptop. Unlike others, he hadn't spoken up or taken out his phone. Now, catching James's eye briefly, he looked away, his expression troubled but his silence maintained. He closed his laptop, gathered his things, and moved to a seat farther from the unfolding scene. In contrast, a group of college students had all taken out their phones, creating a wall of recording devices aimed at the confrontation. Their earlier cheerful chatter had transformed into murmured commentary on what they were witnessing. "They're just trying to get on a plane," one whispered. "This is messed up," another responded. "My dad's a lawyer," a third said. "This is textbook profiling." The young mother with twins had positioned herself between her children and the scene, but she was watching intently, her expression a complex mixture of discomfort and recognition. Her partner had taken out a phone and was typing rapidly, sending messages, not recording. Officer Ramirez had moved slightly apart from Reynolds, her body language conveying her growing discomfort with the situation. She caught Mia Gonzalez's eye, and something passed between them, a silent acknowledgement that this had gone too far. Carol, the gate agent, was speaking urgently into her phone, her expression professional but concerned. "Yes, sir, we have a situation at Gate B22. Security is detaining first-class passengers without clear cause. Yes, sir, it's delaying boarding." "No, I don't know the specific concern." Through it all, Elise Montgomery stood straight-backed and dignified, her eyes never leaving her husband. Her medical training had taught her how to remain calm in crisis, how to assess situations without emotion clouding judgment. Now she was cataloging every detail of what was happening, every word, every action, every witness. A young black girl, perhaps 8 years old, tugged at her father's sleeve and whispered something. He bent down to listen, then shook his head slightly. "Not now, baby," he murmured. But his eyes remained fixed on the scene, watchful and wary. The girl continued to stare at Elise, something like recognition in her young face. The atmosphere had transformed from the usual airport indifference to collective witness. Some watched with outrage, others with discomfort, some with resigned familiarity, but all were watching. And in an age where every phone was a broadcast studio, many were ensuring this moment would exist beyond the confines of Gate B22. Mia Gonzalez had taken out her own phone and appeared to be texting someone with rapid, urgent keystrokes. Her uniform gave her an official presence that lent weight to her evident concern. "Officer," she tried again. "The flight is now boarding all passengers. If you need to continue this investigation, perhaps we could find a more appropriate location. We have a private room near the gate." Reynolds ignored her, completely focused entirely on James as he unclipped the handcuffs from his belt. "Last chance to comply voluntarily, sir. Open the case or you're being detained." James didn't move his gaze steady. "I've explained the situation clearly, officer. That case cannot be opened here. I'm cooperating with everything else." "That's not cooperation," Reynolds snapped. "Hands behind your back. Now." Elise spoke up, her professional tone masking the tension beneath. "Officer Reynolds, my husband has explained that he's legally prohibited from opening classified materials. Surely there's a protocol for verifying his credentials rather than detention." Reynolds turned to her with barely concealed disdain. "Ma'am, I don't need advice on protocols from you." He turned back to James. "I won't ask again." The invisible line had been crossed. What had begun as questionable additional screening had transformed into something else entirely, a public power struggle where authority was being wielded not to protect, but to dominate. And everyone present knew it. Tyler Andrews' voice cut through the tension. "Just so everyone watching knows, I've forwarded this live stream to 3 news stations and the ACLU. Officer Reynolds, badge number 4728, is now threatening to detain a passenger who has identified himself as carrying classified government materials." The young man's broadcast created a new dimension to the confrontation, no longer confined to this gate this moment, but expanding outward into a wider public consciousness. The witnesses were no longer just those physically present, but potentially thousands more watching events unfold in real time. And somewhere in the distance, though, no one at Gate B22 yet realized it. 2 figures in dark suits were already moving purposefully through the terminal toward them. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." Officer Reynolds' voice had taken on a new edge of finality. The moment had arrived when questioning became detention, when suspicion became accusation. James Montgomery looked at his wife, a world of communication passing between them in a single glance. Then, with deliberate calm, he turned to face the wall as instructed. "Officer Reynolds," he said, his voice clear enough to carry to the watching crowd, "I want to state again for the record that I am complying under protest. I have identified myself, truthfully explained the nature of the materials I'm carrying, and have not resisted in any way. What you are doing is not just procedurally incorrect, but potentially a matter of national security." Reynolds snorted as he moved forward with the handcuffs. "Everyone's a national security expert these days." As the metal closed around James's wrists with an audible click, a collective intake of breath passed through the watching crowd. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden silence of the gate area, a small sound with enormous implications. Elise stepped forward, her composure intact, but her voice taking on a new authority. "Officer, I need to accompany my husband if you're detaining him. Those materials cannot be separated from him without proper authorization." Reynolds turned to her with a dismissive gesture. "Stay where you are, ma'am. You'll be processed separately." Processed. Sarah Goldberg's voice rose incredulously from the crowd. "They're not criminals. They're passengers with valid tickets." Reynolds ignored her, focusing on securing the handcuffs. As he did, James spoke again, his voice steady despite his restrained position. "Officer Reynolds, I need to inform you that in approximately 30 seconds you're going to realize you've made the most significant professional error of your career." There was no threat in his tone, only a calm certainty that gave Reynolds momentary pause. Then the officer's face hardened again. "Save the threats for someone who's impressed," he replied, tightening the cuffs with unnecessary force. "You're being detained pending further security investigation." Elise maintained her position, refusing to back away. "Then I'll need to make a phone call immediately. It's relevant to this situation." "Phones get turned in during processing," Reynolds stated flatly. From his position against the wall, James spoke again. "I wouldn't stop her from making that call if I were you." Something in his tone, the absolute certainty devoid of anger or fear, finally penetrated Reynolds's confidence. He hesitated, looking between James and Elise with the first flicker of uncertainty. Elise used the moment to reach slowly for her phone. "I'm going to make one call," she stated, not asking permission. "You're going to want me to make this call, Officer Reynolds." Before Reynolds could respond, Tyler Andrews' voice cut through the tension again. "We just hit 1,000 viewers on the live stream. Airport management has been tagged repeatedly. There's a lawyer in the comments offering to represent you two pro bono." The public nature of the confrontation had transformed it from a simple security stop to something much larger, a documented incident unfolding under the scrutiny of hundreds of eyes, both present and virtual. And Reynolds was beginning to realize the spotlight he'd stepped into. Officer Ramirez finally intervened, moving closer to her partner. "Reynolds, maybe we should verify his credentials before processing them." "If he really does have clearance, I know how to do my job," Reynolds snapped, but the edge of doubt had entered his voice. With James still handcuffed against the wall and Elise standing her ground beside her scattered belongings, the confrontation had reached its peak. The power dynamic that Reynolds had established through his badge and authority was beginning to shift, eroded by the presence of witnesses, the documentation of cameras, and the unshakable composure of the Montgomerys themselves. Elise held up her phone. "I'm calling a number that will verify my husband's identity and the nature of the materials he's carrying. I suggest you allow me to do this for your own sake." Reynolds hesitated, caught between doubling down on his actions and the growing sense that he might be overstepping. Before he could decide, the terminal doors at the far end of the gate area slid open, and two figures in impeccable dark suits entered with purposeful steps. The handcuffs that had seemed so final moments before were about to become evidence of a mistake that couldn't be undone. The terminal doors opened with a soft hydraulic hiss. Through them walked two figures who immediately commanded attention without raising their voices or quickening their steps. They moved with the unhurried confidence of people accustomed to authority, not the kind that needed to be asserted, but the kind that was simply understood. Agent Thomas Sullivan stood just over 6 feet tall, his dark suit impeccably tailored, his posture military precise. At 44, his face carried the weathered experience of a man who had seen more than most, but revealed less. Beside him walked Agent Daniela Rodriguez, 39. Her own suit equally pristine, her alert eyes missing nothing as they swept the gate area. The crowd between the agents and the confrontation parted instinctively, creating a clear path without a word being spoken. It wasn't just their appearance, though the dark suits and earpieces certainly signaled their profession, but something in their bearing that commanded deference. Reynolds, still standing beside James with one hand on his shoulder and the other holding the handcuffs key, didn't immediately notice the new arrivals. He was too focused on Elise, who had begun dialing a number on her phone. "Ma'am, I told you that phones," he began, but his words died in his throat as Agent Sullivan's voice cut through the gate area. "Officer Reynolds, release Mr. Montgomery immediately." The command was delivered at normal volume, but with such authority that it seemed to drop into the space like a stone into still water. Reynolds turned confusion, giving way to defensive irritation as he took in the two agents approaching with measured steps. "This is an active security situation," Reynolds replied, straightening to his full height. "I'm going to need to see some identification before you interfere." Agent Sullivan reached into his jacket with practiced ease, producing a leather credential holder that he opened to display a gold badge and ID card. "Special Agent Thomas Sullivan, United States Secret Service. And this is Special Agent Rodriguez." His partner displayed her own credentials. "Release Mr. Montgomery now." A murmur ran through the watching crowd. The Secret Service. Not TSA supervisors or airport police, but the agency tasked with the highest levels of security and protection. Reynolds stared at the credentials, the color draining from his face as the implications began to sink in. Secret Service. What? Why would you be involved in an airport security screening? Sullivan's expression remained neutral, but his eyes hardened slightly. "You've detained a federal asset in the middle of a classified transport operation. Every second you keep those handcuffs on is another federal violation you're committing." Reynolds looked from Sullivan to James Montgomery, whose back was still turned, hands cuffed behind him. "This man. But he..." There was suspicious. I was just following protocol. Your protocol includes detaining individuals carrying Treasury Department security materials. Agent Rodriguez asked her, tone making it clear there was no acceptable answer. By now, Officer Ramirez had stepped forward, her expression a mixture of alarm and relief. Sir, ma'am, there seems to have been a misunderstanding. We were conducting routine additional screening. There's nothing routine about what we just witnessed. Sullivan cut her off, his gaze returning to Reynolds. The handcuffs, officer. Now! The command in his voice finally penetrated Reynolds's shock. With fumbling fingers, he inserted the key into the cuffs and removed them from James's wrists. As James turned around, rubbing his wrists slightly, the contrast between the two men couldn't have been more stark. Reynolds now uncertain and defensive, James calm and dignified, despite the public humiliation he'd just endured. Mr. Montgomery, are the materials secure? Agent Sullivan asked, his focus immediately shifting to the matter at hand. Yes, Agent Sullivan. Case is intact, untampered with. James confirmed, his tone suddenly taking on the crispness of someone shifting back into a professional role. Sullivan nodded once. Dr. Montgomery, are you all right? I'm fine. Agent Sullivan. Elise replied, her own demeanor reflecting the same shift. Though my notes for the keynote have been scattered. She gestured to the index cards still strewn across the floor. Agent Rodriguez immediately moved to assist, kneeling to gather the cards with careful hands. I apologize for this incident, Doctor. We'll have you on your way shortly. The transformation was remarkable to witness. In the span of 30 seconds, the power dynamic had completely reversed. Reynolds, who had been the authority figure exercising control over the situation, now stood uncertainly to the side while the Montgomerys engaged with the Secret Service agents as respected colleagues. Tyler Andrews, still filming, provided commentary for his growing audience. The Secret Service just arrived and completely shut this down. They knew these passengers by name. This officer just handcuffed someone with government clearance. The crowd at the gate had grown larger as the confrontation attracted more attention. Passengers from neighboring gates had wandered over, drawn by the commotion. Now they watched in fascination as the scene transformed from a security incident into something that appeared to involve national interests. Sullivan turned his attention back to Reynolds, his expression cooling. Officer Reynolds, we'll need your badge number, supervisor information, and a full statement regarding your actions today. Agent Rodriguez will take your details. I was just doing my job. Reynolds stammered, the bluster that had characterized his earlier behavior now completely evaporated. They were acting suspicious. The laptop bag, the locked case protocol says, your protocols do not supersede federal security clearances, Sullivan stated flatly. And they certainly don't justify detaining individuals without cause. The terminal doors opened again, and a woman in a TSA supervisory uniform strode purposefully toward the group, her expression grave. Captain Andrea Wilson had arrived, summoned by the multiple alerts about the situation at Gate B-22. The stage was now set for the full consequences of Reynolds's actions to unfold. What exactly is happening here? Captain Andrea Wilson demanded as she approached, her gaze moving between Reynolds, the Secret Service agents, and the Montgomerys. Her voice carried the authority of someone used to managing crises, but also the controlled concern of a supervisor facing a potentially serious incident. Agent Sullivan turned to her, assessing her role immediately. Captain Wilson, I presume I'm Special Agent Sullivan, Secret Service. Your officer here, he nodded toward Reynolds, has just compromised a federal security operation by detaining a cleared individual transporting classified Treasury Department materials. Wilson's eyes widened slightly before her professional mask returned. I see. And these are the individuals in question. She glanced at the Montgomerys, who were now collecting their scattered belongings with Rodriguez's assistance. Yes. Mr. James Montgomery is a Level 8 security consultant currently transporting encryption protocols for the Federal Reserve's new financial security system. Dr. Elise Montgomery is a cardiothoracic surgeon en route to deliver the keynote address at the National Medical Association's annual gala in D.C. Sullivan's tone made it clear that these facts should never have been in question. The revelation sent a ripple through the watching crowd. The passengers who had witnessed Reynolds' treatment of the couple now understood the magnitude of his error. Tyler Andrews, still live streaming, whistled softly as he narrated for his viewers. So this officer just handcuffed a guy carrying top-secret financial security stuff and harassed a keynote-speaking surgeon. This is wild. Wilson turned to Reynolds, her expression hardening. Officer Reynolds, explanation. Now. Reynolds had lost all his earlier confidence, his posture deflated. There were suspicious indicators. The man was protective of his bag they were evasive about. Evasive James interrupted, speaking for the first time since being uncuffed. His voice remained calm, but carried a new edge of authority. I explicitly told you I was carrying classified materials that couldn't be opened in public. I identified myself correctly. I explained my role. You chose not to believe me. The database showed no record of Reynolds began. Because those records are classified, Agent Rodriguez cut in having finished helping Elise collect her notes. Mr. Montgomery's security details don't appear in standard law enforcement databases precisely because of the sensitive nature of his work. Wilson closed her eyes, briefly processing the implications. When she opened them, her focus was entirely on damage control. Mr. and Dr. Montgomery, on behalf of the airport security team, I offer my sincere apologies for this inexcusable incident. Rest assured that appropriate actions will be taken. Elise, now standing with her belongings reorganized, addressed Wilson directly. Captain, I appreciate that. But this wasn't just an inconvenience or a misunderstanding. My husband was publicly handcuffed. Our belongings were searched and scattered. We were treated like criminals in front of hundreds of witnesses. She gestured to the crowd and the many phones still recording the scene. And I have to wonder if our appearance played a role in Officer Reynolds' assessment of us as suspicious. The implication hung in the air, unmistakable but unstated directly. Wilson didn't deny it. Your concerns are valid, Dr. Montgomery. I assure you this will be thoroughly investigated. Agent Sullivan checked his watch. Captain Wilson, we need to get the Montgomerys on their flight immediately. This material is time-sensitive, and Dr. Montgomery has professional obligations in D.C. I trust you can handle your officer while we complete this transport. Of course. Wilson nodded, then turned to address the gate agent. Carol, please expedite boarding for Mr. and Dr. Montgomery. Carol, who had been watching the unfolding scene with increasing alarm, quickly moved to the boarding computer. Yes, ma'am. Right away. Reynolds stood to the side, his face ashen as the full consequences of his actions began to dawn on him. This wasn't a simple case of overzealous screening that would result in a reprimand. He had interfered with federal agents. He had detained someone with high-level security clearance. He had potentially compromised classified materials. And he had done it all in front of hundreds of witnesses with recording devices. Officer Reynolds Wilson said, her voice tight with controlled anger. Surrender your badge and radio. You're relieved of duty, effective immediately, pending full investigation. Reynolds stared at her in disbelief. Andrea, Captain, you can't just... That's not a request, Officer Wilson stated firmly. Badge and radio. Now. With trembling fingers, Reynolds unpinned his badge and unclipped his radio, handing them to Wilson without meeting her eyes. Agent Rodriguez had moved to stand beside the Montgomerys, creating a protective buffer as Carol prepared their boarding passes. Sullivan remained focused on Wilson and Reynolds, ensuring the security situation was fully contained. The watching crowd had fallen silent, witnessing not just the resolution of a confrontation, but a complete reversal of fortune, power, and dignity restored to those who had been wrongfully challenged, and consequences falling on the one who had abused his authority. Sarah Goldberg, the older woman who had spoken up earlier, approached Elise cautiously. Dr. Montgomery, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry this happened to you both. and I'm still grateful every day for what you did for my heart." Elise's professional composure softened slightly. "Thank you, Sarah. It's good to see you doing so well." She glanced at her watch. "I should be back in clinic next Tuesday if you need anything." The simple exchange doctor and patient, a normal professional interaction, stood in stark contrast to the humiliating treatment she had endured minutes earlier. It highlighted the absurdity of Reynolds's suspicions and the baselessness of his actions. As the Montgomerys prepared to finally board their flight, the impact of what had occurred at Gate B-22 was already rippling outward beyond the immediate participants to the witnesses, both present and virtual, who had seen power abused and then corrected in real time. "Mr. and Dr. Montgomery, your boarding passes are ready," Carol announced, her professional demeanor restored, but her hands still slightly shaky from the tension of the past half hour. "We've upgraded you to our premium first-class section and arranged priority handling at your destination." James accepted the new boarding passes with a nod of thanks. "I appreciate that, Carol. Though I should note that none of this was the airline's fault." Agent Sullivan moved beside them, keeping his voice low. "We'll escort you to your seats to ensure no further interruptions. Once you're settled, I'll need to verify the integrity of the case." Elise gathered her reorganized belongings, the scattered index cards now back in order, thanks to Agent Rodriguez's help. "What about our checked luggage?" "After this incident, I'm concerned about tampering." "Already addressed," Rodriguez assured her. "We've confirmed your bags were loaded normally and haven't been flagged or separated." As the small group prepared to board, Captain Wilson was leading a visibly shaken Reynolds away from the gate area. His shoulders were slumped, his earlier authority completely evaporated. Passengers watched their departure with expressions ranging from satisfaction to uncomfortable sympathy. Officer Ramirez remained at the gate now, coordinating with other security personnel who had arrived to normalize the situation. Her face showed the strain of witnessing her partner's disgrace, but also a certain relief that the truth had emerged. Tyler Andrews finally lowered his phone, the live stream still running. And that's how it ended, folks. Over 3,000 viewers watched this happen in real time. The couple is now boarding with a Secret Service escort, and the officer has been relieved of duty. He turned to the camera. "Remember this, the next time someone tells you recording doesn't matter. Recording always matters." Several passengers who had witnessed the entire confrontation approached the boarding line, offering quiet words of support to the Montgomerys. "That was handled with incredible dignity," one woman murmured. "I'm so sorry you went through that," added another. James and Elise acknowledged the comments with gracious nods but maintained their composed demeanor. This wasn't the time or place for processing what had happened that would come later in private. As they finally moved toward the jet bridge, the rest of the first-class passengers were allowed to line up behind them. The regular boarding process resumed, though the atmosphere remained charged with the energy of what everyone had witnessed. Sarah Goldberg, still watching from her seat near the window, caught Elise's eye one last time and placed her hand over her heart, a gesture of solidarity and gratitude. Elise returned the gesture subtly, a private acknowledgement between doctor and patient that transcended the ugly incident that had just occurred. On the jet bridge away from the watching crowd, James finally allowed himself a deep breath. "You okay?" he asked Elise quietly. "I'm fine," she assured him, though the tension in her shoulders told a different story. "Just focused on making it to D.C. in time for the speech." "You will," he promised, "and it will be brilliant." Agent Sullivan, walking slightly ahead of them, spoke without turning. "The Treasury Department has been notified of the incident. They're not happy. I imagine." "Not," James replied dryly. "This won't just disappear," Sullivan continued. "There will be questions, investigations, possibly hearings." "Are you prepared for that?" Elise exchanged a glance with her husband. "We've been through worse," she said simply. The hushed ambiance of the hotel suite provided a stark contrast to the public spectacle they had endured earlier. Elise sat at the desk, making final adjustments to her keynote speech, while James stood by the window overlooking the Washington Monument, his phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, sir." The materials were delivered intact. "No compromise to the encryption keys. Yes, I understand the concerns about the security protocols at Hartsfield-Jackson." James listened intently, his free hand absently rubbing his wrist where the handcuffs had been. The Secret Service team was responsive once alerted. The issue was with the initial security screening. "Yes, sir. I'll be available for the full debriefing tomorrow." Elise watched her husband as he concluded the call, noting the tension in his shoulders that hadn't fully dissipated since Atlanta. When he finally set the phone down, she asked the question that had been on her mind during their entire flight. "How are you really doing?" James turned from the window, his professional mask slipping just enough to reveal the emotional toll underneath. "I'm processing." "You the same." She set her pen down beside the index cards. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you weren't carrying that case, if you didn't have that clearance, if the Secret Service hadn't been tracking the materials." James crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed facing her. "I know. That's what keeps circling in my mind, too. 7 minutes, James. For 7 minutes we were completely at his mercy. And the only reason it ended was because of what you were carrying, not because of who we are, not because what he was doing was wrong, but because you had government property that needed protection." The reality of it settled between them, the uncomfortable truth that their rescue had come not from justice, but from circumstance. Had James been just another black professional, had Elise been just another doctor without a patient to vouch for her, had there been no classified materials involved, the outcome could have been vastly different. "I've been thinking about that young couple at the gate next to ours," James said quietly. "The ones with the twins. They saw everything. What lesson did those kids learn today about how the world works? About who gets protected and who doesn't?" Elise reached for his hand. "I don't know, but I keep seeing that little girl's face, the one who kept watching me. Like she recognized something happening that she'd seen before or been warned about. That officer didn't see a surgeon and a security consultant," James continued. "He saw 2 black people who he decided didn't belong in first class. That's it. That's the beginning and end of his analysis. And he was willing to derail a federal security transport and a medical keynote address based on that assumption." Elise shook her head. "The arrogance of it is almost as infuriating as the prejudice." James squeezed her hand gently. "How's the speech coming?" "Still up for delivering it tonight." Elise straightened professional resolve, returning to her expression. "Absolutely. In fact, I've made some revisions. My talk was supposed to be about innovations in cardiac care for underserved communities. But after today, I think it needs to address the heart of a different kind of problem: the social determinants of health. More specifically, the way authority and bias impact who receives care, who's believed about their pain, who's listened to in clinical settings." She gestured to her notes. "What happened today isn't separate from the medical issues I specialize in. It's part of the same structure." James nodded slowly. "Using what happened as a case study. Not exploitatively," Elise clarified, "but authentically. These cardiologists and surgeons need to understand that their black patients navigate these barriers every day in every institution, including theirs." The grand ballroom of the Washington Hilton glittered with elegant centerpieces and the soft glow of chandeliers. Over 500 of the nation's top cardiothoracic surgeons, researchers, and medical administrators filled the tables, their quiet conversations creating a gentle murmur throughout the space. At the head table, Dr. Richard Bennett, president of the National Medical Association, approached the microphone. "Distinguished colleagues, it is my honor to introduce our keynote speaker this evening, Dr. Elise Montgomery is the youngest head of valve replacement surgery at Atlanta Memorial Hospital. pioneering minimally invasive techniques that have reduced recovery times by 40% and made these life-saving procedures accessible to patients previously considered too high risk for intervention. James sat at a table near the front watching his wife with pride as she prepared to take the stage. Despite the day's events, or perhaps because of them, she radiated a particular intensity tonight, a focused energy that seemed to draw all eyes to her even before she rose from her seat. What many of you may not know, Bennett continued, is that Dr. Montgomery is also the founder of the Cardiac Care Initiative, which has established 5 clinics in underserved communities across Georgia, providing preventative cardiology services to populations with historically limited access to specialized care. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Elise Montgomery. The applause was warm and genuine as Elise ascended the steps to the podium. In her burgundy gown, with her hair styled elegantly and her posture impeccable, she embodied professional excellence. Only James, who knew her so well, could see the subtle signs of the day's strain, a slight tightness around her eyes, a barely perceptible tension in her shoulders. "Thank you, Dr. Bennett, and good evening, colleagues." Her voice was clear and strong, carrying easily through the ballroom. "I had planned to speak to you tonight about the technical innovations in valve replacement that my team has developed over the past 3 years. I had statistics prepared, case studies selected, and some truly remarkable patient outcomes to share." She paused, surveying the room of medical professionals who waited expectantly for insights into her groundbreaking surgical techniques. But something happened today that has compelled me to address a different, though related topic. A topic that I believe is just as crucial to the health outcomes of our patients as any surgical innovation or pharmaceutical development. A subtle shift in the atmosphere of the ballroom, a heightened attention, a collective leaning forward. This morning, while attempting to board a flight to be here with you tonight, my husband and I were stopped at the gate, publicly detained and subjected to humiliating treatment by an airport security officer who decided, based solely on our appearance, that we didn't belong in the first-class line. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Some had already seen the viral video, others were hearing about the incident for the first time. My husband was handcuffed. My personal belongings were dumped out for public inspection. My medical credentials were questioned and dismissed. And the only reason this situation was resolved was because my husband happened to be transporting classified materials for the Treasury Department, which brought Secret Service intervention. She let the gravity of that sink in before continuing. I share this not for sympathy, but because this experience crystallized something I've observed throughout my medical career. Systems are only as good as their ability to serve everyone equally, and too often they fail at that fundamental task. Elise moved from behind the podium, choosing to stand at the edge of the stage for a more direct connection with her audience. As cardiac surgeons, we operate on the physical heart. We replace valves, repair chambers, clear blockages. But there's another kind of heart we must attend to, the heart of our healthcare system itself. And that system suffers from blockages every bit as dangerous as coronary artery disease. Her gaze swept across the room, making eye contact with colleagues from institutions across the country. When a Black patient describes chest pain but is sent home with anxiety medication, while a white patient with identical symptoms gets an immediate ECG, that's a blockage in the system. When diverse candidates aren't recruited for clinical trials despite the known variances in treatment responses across different genetic backgrounds, that's a blockage in the system. When medical schools continue to teach that Black patients have higher pain thresholds, perpetuating a myth born in the darkest chapters of medical history, that's a blockage in the system. The ballroom had fallen completely silent, every eye fixed on Elise as she connected her personal experience to the broader issues facing their profession. What happened to me today at the airport isn't separate from what happens in our hospitals. It's part of the same continuum where certain people are presumed not to belong in certain spaces, whether that's a first-class cabin or a cardiac care unit. She returned to the podium and lifted a small metal object, a stethoscope. This instrument allows us to hear what's happening beneath the surface. Tonight, I'm asking all of you to use your metaphorical stethoscopes to listen deeply to what's happening in your institutions, your practices, your operating rooms. to hear the murmurs of inequality that might otherwise go undiagnosed. The evening sun cast long shadows through the windows of the Montgomery Sullivan Initiative's executive office as James and Elise sat together reviewing the day's developments. On the table between them lay the final draft of their annual impact report, a comprehensive document detailing the organization's work over the past 2 years and its vision for the future. "I still can't quite believe how far this has come," Elise said, turning the pages that documented thousands of cases, supported dozens of policies reformed, and measurable improvements in transportation equity metrics across the country. James nodded, his expression reflective. "From 7 minutes at a gate to all of this. It's not the path either of us would have chosen, but I can't argue with where it led." The office around them bore witness to that journey. Awards from civil rights organizations lined one wall, while another displayed framed letters from travelers whose experiences had been transformed by the initiative's work. A small shelf held a collection of more personal mementos, including a single pair of handcuffs mounted in a clear display case, a reminder of where it had all begun. "I was thinking about Reynolds today," Elise admitted. "His parole hearing is next month." James looked up, surprised. "Are you planning to attend?" She shook her head. "No, but I've been reflecting on what his actions set in motion. He thought he was stopping us from boarding a plane. What he really did was launch a movement." The observation captured something essential about their journey, how an attempt to diminish them had instead become the catalyst for expansion far beyond what either of them had imagined possible. "Do you remember that little girl at the gate?" James asked. "The one who kept watching you throughout the incident?" Elise nodded. "I think about her often. She must be about 10 now. I saw a family at the airport today that reminded me of her. A young black girl, maybe 9 or 10, walking through the first-class line with her parents. No one questioned them. No one gave them a second look. They just moved through the space like they belonged there, which of course they did." The observation hung between them, a small moment representing a larger shift. Not a complete transformation of society or an end to the biases that had shaped their experience, but a measurable change in one specific context where their work had made a difference. "That's what this has always been about," Elise said softly. "Not just responding to what happened to us, but ensuring it happens less often to others." James reached for her hand across the table. "We still have so much work to do." "We do," she agreed. "But we're not doing it alone anymore." That was perhaps the most significant development of the past 2 years, the way their individual response to injustice had expanded into a collective movement involving thousands of travelers, hundreds of volunteers, dozens of partner organizations, and a growing cohort of institutional allies within the very systems they had once confronted. On the desk behind them sat a framed photograph taken at Gate B22 during their recent return visit. Unlike the image from 2 years earlier that captured their humiliation, this one showed them standing tall in the same space surrounded by the airport's new civil rights compliance team, a visual representation of how the site of their ordeal had been transformed into a place of progress. "We should head home," Elise said, checking her watch. "Early surgery tomorrow." As they gathered their things and prepared to leave, James paused at the doorway, looking back at the office that represented so much more than either of them had envisioned when they'd first considered establishing a small foundation in response to their experience. "You know what I'm most proud of?" he asked. "What's that?" "That we didn't just fight back. We built forward. Reynolds tried to put us in our place. Instead, we created a new place entirely, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who comes after us." Elise smiled, understanding completely. "From 7 minutes to forever." The next time you walk through an airport terminal, glance around at your fellow travelers moving through security checkpoints, boarding gates, and priority lanes. Notice who gets questioned and who doesn't. Notice who moves through spaces with ease and who faces additional scrutiny. Notice who is assumed to belong and who must continuously prove their right to be there. What you're witnessing isn't random. It's the result of decisions, policies, and assumptions, some explicit, some implicit, all consequential for those on the receiving end. When James and Elise Montgomery were stopped at Gate B-22, they happened to have the protection of federal credentials and Secret Service intervention. Their humiliation lasted 7 minutes instead of hours or days. Their careers continued instead of being derailed. Their dignity was restored through external validation of their belonging. But what about everyone else? What about the Maria Gonzalezes traveling to sick relatives, the students returning to universities, the professionals heading to conferences, the families taking hard-earned vacations, all without Secret Service agents to intervene when their presence is questioned simply because of how they look? That's where you come in. In a world where phones are always present and documentation is always possible, the simple act of witnessing becomes its own form of intervention. Recording becomes accountability. Presence becomes protection. The next time you see someone treated unfairly because of how they look, whether at an airport gate, a hotel lobby, or any public space where belonging is policed and questioned, remember this: in that moment, you might be the only Secret Service they have. And sometimes 7 minutes of dignity preserved can launch a lifetime of change. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue to share these powerful real-life stories that shine a light on important issues affecting our communities every day. Share this video with friends and family who might need to hear this message, because change begins when we bear witness to truth together. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or similar experiences. Have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination in public spaces? How did you respond? Your voice matters in this conversation. Thank you for watching, and remember, small actions can create powerful ripples of change.